Hey everybody, welcome to another podcast with Efrvsnt. My name is Lisa Wilson. I am the CEO here at Efrvsnt Leadership. I am joined today with a dear friend of mine, Castel Valere-Couturier. He is the CEO and founder of Sound Off, and we are so incredibly happy to have him on today. He's going to talk to us a little bit about his experience in leadership and what brought him to where he is. Castel, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Hey, Lisa, thanks so much for having me join you. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Great. Hey, so why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about your life experiences, kind of what brought you to where you are today, and a little bit about Sound Off specifically.
Yeah, of course. Man, my life experiences that got me where I am today, it's been quite a wild ride. Definitely not linear. From college, I studied marketing and finance at University of Denver. From there, I helped launch an energy drink called Crunk Juice with Little John. I was there for about 4 years and then transitioned into the eyewear industry, doing sales and marketing and technology consulting for eyewear brands and retailers, everything from bringing in independent luxury eyewear brands from Europe into the States and helping with distribution there, and also doing practice management software, everything from electronic medical records, invoicing, inventory management, that kind of stuff. So it's been a little bit all over the place, but sort of like each part of that journey has, brought me to Sound Off in one way, shape, or form. Specifically when I was in the optical industry, I had this moment about 5 years in. I hadn't taken vacation in 4 or 5 years, and I was at a trade show, and one of my industry colleagues died of a heart attack, 42 years old, about 50 feet away from me.
Oh my gosh.
And I just sort of, like, my life flashed in front of my eyes, and I said, man, I haven't taken any time for myself. I've got to make a change, because this could be me. And that led me to take 8 weeks of vacation.
Wow. Yeah, you really did have a lot stored up, huh? 8 weeks. Wow.
Well, I was working for myself, but it's one of those things when you're running your own business, you're like always trying to find the time, and can you justify making the expense? And I said, look, the alternative is death here. So let me go and take some time, spend the money that I may or may not have, and just travel, see the world, do something interesting, and we'll see what happens. And along that trip, I ended up in Tel Aviv, Israel, which is where I discovered the technology for Sound Off.
Okay.
It's sort of interesting, the journeys that lead you to where you are. But for me, it was this moment of saying, I needed to reevaluate what I was doing and how I was doing it. And it brought me to, my next big project.
Great. So, Sound Off is predominantly remote, right? Most of your team is remote, correct?
So we started originally very remote, because I didn't really know what I was doing, right? So when I started this business, it was very much a passion project. I saw the technology. I sort of understood that there could be some market applications as far as solving problems for people, mostly around sound ordinance in urban environments. And also just creating a new kind of experience and a new kind of audio experience for people. So that was really where it started. It was a passion project. I've been running Sound Off it'll be 10 years in December. But the first 5 years was as a side project, just sort of like feeling things out, testing the waters out with new concepts, and, seeing if anyone actually wanted this stuff. And so it was, so along that journey, it was, I had my marketing director, who was working sort of side by side, and then I was doing all the other things. And along the way, I was trying to figure out who are the people that I need for different kinds of things. And, one of the things about starting a niche business like this is that it draws people that are really excited about what you're doing. And so, the gentleman, for instance, who's now my logistics manager, he found us on Instagram. He was a DJ in Turkey at the time. He was moving to the States and was like, I love the brand. I love what you're doing. Like, I want to be involved. And so he went from like, being a DJ for us to working in sales to doing SEO to, now running our logistics. And, but, he went from Turkey. He had a brief stint in New York and then moved to San Diego. He hated the weather in New York and it's like, I got to go. So we started the first 5-6 years, I was just sort of like, I found people that I met along the way, especially as our events business started to grow. That also wasn't linear. I launched the company in Colorado, then moved to New York. Then we opened Vegas and then Hong Kong, then Los Angeles. So, because a lot of it was based off of referral and connections and people experiencing and saying like, oh, I want to bring it here. And I just said yes to all of the things. Yeah. And so that led to us having a remote operation as far as like our contractors who are on the ground servicing the events, our audio technicians, and then some of the other people who ended up working internally for the company. Over the last 2 to 3 years, I've really been focused on building our core team here in New York, and then COVID, it was, we got like an office in New York on Wall Street, and we just started bringing people in. Like all of our new hires from an executive standpoint were all in New York, just because one of the things that I noticed was, at the beginning, Jen, who's my marketing director, who, we've known each other for years. And, because she had an opportunity to experience the technology, in real life as things were happening and we were close friends, she was very connected to me and connected to the brand. And she's worked on every project I've ever had since college.
Wow.
Logo, every asset, everything, like she's developed it all. So she innately knew everything that was cycling through my brain. So that made it very easy for us to work remotely. And her husband works in the military. So, she's moved around with him and, but we've always had a great rapport and we were able to work remotely closely. And, but as we brought on new people, sometimes it just ended up being a little bit more challenging to really get them to understand, how I think and how I want things executed. Because you can shoot emails, you can have conference calls, but there's something about like the nuance of, turning to the left and like having a conversation or someone overhearing the way that you're speaking about something that a lot of that got lost in translation, or at least it was a bigger, thing to overcome or ramp up, to get someone to ramp up to get something up to speed. Because again, we're talking about a niche business, and it's not, we're not like a soda or a water or something that's not saying that they don't have their own challenges as far as languages and marketing, but what we are doing is very unique. And being able to have like someone new coming on board be immersed in what we're doing from day one was really important. And so so we started building our team in New York, and over the last couple of years, and then COVID happened, and we're now working remotely. So the good news is that for let's say 75% of our company's existence, we've worked as a remote organization. And so all the systems that we put in place from the beginning were intended for us to be able to work in that fashion. So, fortunately we had that experience. And so it hasn't been particularly difficult right now for us to handle communication, because we're already like used to Zoom calls and conference calls and, Slack and Asana and all the different productivity tools internally to keep people organized while they're working.
I've had the privilege of being able to watch from the sidelines as you've grown this. I remember having lunch with you, 10 years ago now, as Sound Off was just really starting to be a thing that I think you had just come back from overseas, and you were kind of flirting with the idea. You mentioned saying yes to everything. How has Sound Off changed over the years for the better because of that mentality of saying yes to everything?
So we've definitely evolved for the better for saying yes for a number of reasons. One is that, I had an idea of what I wanted to do with the technology when I first started, but at the time, I was deeply rooted in entertainment and nightlife. I mean, obviously, we met, we're both working in that industry, and so I thought, we're gonna, do big events and festivals and DJ parties and all that stuff. That was like the real main objective.
Yeah.
But as we started to do events, and for the better part of the first 4 years, it was almost exclusively silent disco oriented. And silent discos, those are dance parties with wireless headphones. So it was almost exclusively silent discos. But once people tried the headphones on, there would be like a light that came on that's like, oh, like, can we use it for this? And I would say, yeah, sure. I mean, we can figure that out. So it went from being dance parties to, doing translation events, to being outdoor movie screenings, to then we got into fitness and wellness, which has become, a lion's share of our business now. Then people saying, well, we had enough people that were using the technology on an ongoing basis. Like, well, can I buy this stuff from you? I was like, well, I mean, sure. So like every step of the way, a lot of what we've done has been reactive in a way, which has always been frustrating for me, because I wanted to be like, all right, cool, we're championing this, we're going to like double down on this thing. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, like a new market arises. 2018, 2019 for us was like the year of geriatrics. We had a group in Western Canada that got a hold of our headphones. They started using the headphones for sound therapy with patients that had brain trauma and dementia, and they saw incredible results. So that kicked off an 18-month study. And we got planted into this world of, geriatrics, which, I mean, that was definitely nothing that I'd imagined, but that's what's amazing about the technology, is it's so versatile. And at the core of it, it's a personalized wireless audio solution for any kind of audio experience. So when you boil it down to that, there's so many different ways that you can apply it, but it's just unlimited in the number of ways. I mean, you think about all the different ways that you use traditional sound, right? Traditional amplified audio. Essentially, you can do it with headphones. And so there's a million different ways that you can use it. And so, I guess we're still scratching the surface as to what's possible. And so that's part of what makes it exciting. Yeah. But also, it can keep you distracted, right? Because it's a constant, for us, for a long time, it was a constant game of like kitchen sink. It's like out there, then, but you have to really, because if you look at, just the fitness industry, like that's $1 million industry. If you're talking about conferences and meetings, events, that's a multi-million-dollar industry. I mean, all of these sub verticals within our bigger picture are huge opportunities. And so, saying yes has definitely created lots of opportunities. It's also, hampered us in some ways, in that like we haven't, it's like always you're chasing a new shiny object, right?
Yeah. I think that's startups. Startups is like the wild, wild west. And I think that's what's so critical with your team, that they are able to pivot with you, because I think it takes a very specific personality type to survive in startups because of that. So, a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs, they are executive level. So I think this will speak to a lot of them in that capacity, with this COVID massive pivot that all of us had to endure. How have you managed your team through the pivots that you're having to do right now?
Yeah, it's been a very challenging time, right? Because it's one of those moments where everyone's suffering, right? And as the person that everyone's looking to for like advice or whatever it is, sympathy, empathy, there's a lot of pressure. There was a lot of pressure on me to make sure that I was communicating with the team correctly and making sure that I could support them, right? Because we're all going through it together. And so I think that was really important for me to make sure that they understood that I was there with them. And honestly, I think that's been a part of our corporate fabric since the beginning, even though I'm, the CEO or Chief Experience Officer is like my technical title, but I always say that, like I'm working with so-and-so, they don't work for me. And I really feel like that's part of our, that's a really strong part of our organizations. Like people feel like we're all walking hand in hand. And so, with that said, at the very beginning, we had calls about kind of what things could look like. And I was just very transparent about kind of where we're at, how much runway we had. And, unfortunately, we got to a point where things really shifted for us and we had to, furlough some people. And those were really difficult conversations. But, I think that we've been fortunate to be able to start bouncing back and, everyone that was on my team, they've come back like wholeheartedly. We even had people that, while they were furloughed, they offered to just, work and they believed in what we were doing and they wanted to work and, they're like, look, we'll figure it out later sort of thing. So that was really cool.
That's awesome. That says a lot about your culture. That's great.
Exactly. And, it's one of those things that's, that is interesting from a leadership standpoint because, I just always try to put my best foot forward with my team and I try to be transparent and honest with them. And I try to be kind. Obviously there's always like, you have little scruffs internally and you work through those things, but, it's important to me that everyone feels heard and that they have a voice in the company. And I think that that's been really core to like our foundation as we've built. And, I think it was sort of a funny story. A couple of years ago, I had my finance manager at the time. She took she was like, hey, Castel, I need to take a day off. Or she was like, I'm going to take the afternoon off. I've got a friend in town. We're going to walk around the city. And then she called me about like 2 p.m. She's like, Castel, had too many cocktails at lunch. I'm not coming. I was like, okay. So then like maybe an hour or two later, she calls me. She's like, Castel, it's Friday. I'm on the rooftop of the Standard. You got to come and meet me for drinks. It's awesome out here. I'm like, listen, Crystal, like I've got to work. Like, she's like, listen, just get out here, stop working for once, just come out. And so I remember meeting, I obliged like 6 o'clock. I went and met her. And, she was amazing, just like great personality, super charismatic. She like rallied this whole group of people. And I walked in, the first thing she said, she's like, everyone, this is my friend Castel. And like, I just took a moment and paused because like we'd worked closely together. I would say that we're friendly with each other. I would consider her a friend, but like, we never really did a lot of stuff outside of the office together, but she was like, she introduced me as her friend and not as her boss. And that was like so touching to me, because you just never know, I'm not like in my people's like Facebook feeds or in their Instagram stories or whatever. I really let them like live their own independent lives. But it's been nice knowing that, the people on my team look at me and they see me like someone that they would want to hang out with and have happy hour with, and not just like a dude at the top who's like dropping the hammer.
A lot of what you're saying very much resonates with transformational leadership. And just a lot of the tenets of transformational leadership. What have you experienced in your coming up to be in the position that you are, that you have taken with you, you know, a little bit of this that worked, or maybe said, I'm going to leave that aside from some of the experiences that you had in the past that brought you to where you are as a leader with your team?
You know, I think it's been a lot of listening along the way. I've had a lot of other entrepreneurs that I've looked up to who have, you know, sort of taken me under their wing as I was working with their company, and really gave me insights as to like how they ran their business and how they drove their culture. I remember, for instance, there's one gentleman that I worked for, and he said to me, he was like, you know, Castel, I love you. Like, you're doing such an amazing job for me. I was working in sales for him at the time. He said, but like, you're driving the whole team crazy. Like, you're driving everyone nuts. He was like, I need you to like help me out here, you know? And
what was it that you were doing? Just being overly efficient, or?
Well, you know, they're a California company. They're a little like laid back, chill beach vibes. And they used to call me like on all my packages that I would get, it'd say like the morning warrior, because, you know, they're already 3 hours behind. So by the time, you know, 9 a.m. rolled around in California, they had like several voice messages. I was like calling at 9:05. I was like, you know, this order didn't get shipped out. What's going on? Blah, blah, blah. You know, it was very like, for them, they hadn't, like, I guess I came across as like a real New Yorker to them, not vibing with it, you know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, that was something, you know, it's a small thing, but I learned from him, first of all, just being open with me about like the issue that I was causing within the company, right? Like I was just causing so much chaos in the business, and I didn't see it. I was on the outside, you know?
Yeah.
You know, it helped me change how I had conversations with people internally, and making sure that they felt valued in those conversations. It was really interesting to me because you know, it's one of those things like it was a positive experience, and then also led me to reminded me of like how it's important to never build, you know, burn bridges, and remember, like, you know, the people who you're engaging with today, you know, you don't know where they're going to be in the future. And I had an experience where my customer service rep, who really had a problem with me at that company, one of my customer service reps, he left the company, he moved to Hong Kong. And years later, when we opened up Hong Kong for Sound Off, we were approached by, I can't remember if we were approached, we reached out, but somehow there was like some communication that happened with Time Out Magazine. Turned out that same person was the editor for events at Time Out Magazine in Hong Kong. And like, you know, our relationship was golden at that point, but like it would have been completely different, like Time Out being such a huge publication for live events and special events. Yeah. He could have completely just shut us down, being like, that guy is a terrible person. You know?
Well, yeah, because, you know, we're never the villain in our own story, right? We're always the hero of our own story. So
exactly. So yeah, I've been really fortunate to be able to have, you know, great entrepreneurs to sort of learn from along the way, seeing how they, you know, have conversations with people at all levels of their teams. And, you know, I've never worked for large companies. Maybe the largest by internal headcount was maybe 10 or 15 people. And so, you know, for that reason, that's always kept me really close to, you know, everyone in the company, whether it's, you know, the warehouse manager, customer service, or the CEO of the company. And I think that experience has been really beneficial, you know, for me to lean on as I've been building my company and sort of thinking through what are the best practices, what's the vibe that I want to create, what's the energy that I want to create within the company.
Do you still have those mentors?
Yes. You know, we don't touch base all the time, but we're still in contact. But I learned so much from them. They just, you know, everything from sales strategy and execution. I work for a guy named Bill Barton who launched this luxury eyewear brand called Barton Prayer, and he's just so big on his brand. Like there is nothing in the world that is better than Barton Prayer. There's just so much conviction, you know, which, you know, it was amazing when I saw like our growth as I was working with them. I mean, people just really bought into that. And that was just something that, you know, reminded me as I've been running my own ship. It's like, I really have to be the author of that. Like I have to make sure that people believe in what we're doing. It can't be, you know, like, oh, well, maybe, you know, like you have to be like concrete, you know, 1000%. And that confidence really drives results when you're talking about, you know, high level conversations with people who are going to spend big bucks. That makes a world of difference. So, you know, things from that standpoint to, you know, managing a team and making sure people feel like they're loved and appreciated, all that kind of stuff. It is really, I think, beneficial to me to not just be like a number as far as like a cog in the wheel in a big company and like essentially like have these environments where I was just part of the family. And, you know, we're still, you know, my startup is still very much a small business. You know, at our biggest, you know, we've never had more than 8 people internally, even though we manage, you know, from an events perspective, we have about like over 200 contractors that work with us on an event. So, you know, that has been, you know, somewhat of a challenge, is being in a position where, you know, having 200 people to manage is like, that's the biggest company. Like I'm running the biggest company by numbers that I've ever been involved with. So there's a whole bunch of, you know, new things that come down the path. But I think I got really good fundamentals from the people that I had the opportunity to work with in my career early on.
So 200 people, I mean, that's globally, right? Because you have offices all over the place. You have offices, you know, in Hong Kong, like you said, in San Diego, in New York, you know, and that's different cultures of people. That's just different time zones. Like, how are you managing that?
It definitely hasn't been easy. You know, especially because you know, like I was saying before, we grew in a non-linear fashion. So, you know, from Colorado to New York, then Hong Kong, you're managing 12-hour time difference. And so whether that's sales calls and operations, I mean, it essentially made my life a 24-hour, you know, round the clock operation. So it's been challenging, but fortunately, you know, you've got like all of the modern tools, right? So whether it's WhatsApp or Slack or, you know, email, all that stuff, I mean, it just makes it a lot easier. I try to imagine what it would have been like, you know, 20 years ago trying to do the same things. I mean, virtually.
COVID would have smacked us all even harder than it is, you know? We would have not had any potential to do anything like this, I think even 10 years ago. Yeah,
no, for sure. I mean, you know, we've taken advantage of all of the tools that are out there. Like I said, we use Asana, we use Slack, you know, we have scheduling tools for all of our contract employees. We have a software that we use that, like, you know, really helped us sort of like organize that, because when I started, you know, we had, you know, a couple of events here and there. It was easy to like call someone or text someone, but then, you know, you get to a place where there's, you know, hundreds of conversations that are happening. In 2019, we managed 621 events.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's just so much communication that needs to happen. So we spent a lot of time on building systems internally to make sure that, the communication with everyone at every level in the chain, whether you're, picking stuff up from the warehouse, or your staff member that are showing up on site, or you're an audio technician or DJ or yoga instructor, you had like clear information every time. So there's a lot of great tools out there. And I think, sometimes it's a little daunting because there's so much, and you have to find like the right tool that's going to work for your business. Because, most things are made for, they're sort of like, it's general application. So you really have to sort of like drill into customizing things so that they work as you need them to.
So that way, you make sure you guys are all speaking the same language. Exactly. If your shorthand is the same across all platforms.
Exactly.
Right on. I wanted us to also kind of touch on, another, we talked about COVID and getting through COVID, and you and I have had some offline conversations about, right now and the status of the U.S. specifically right now, and, the situation of you being in, you're a Black owned business. And, like you said before, like you're the CEO, you're the chief, experience officer, but you're not very outward facing with your organization. You run it behind the scenes while everybody else is out there more forward facing. So, for our listeners, I want to make sure that we're clear. I'm going to ask you some questions about your unique experiences, like anything, one person cannot speak for a whole group of people, but we can definitely talk about your unique experiences. But I thought it was really important to talk on that because that is something that you are dealing with currently, about something like, are you going to quote unquote come out as a Black owned business? Is that something that you've decided to do, or are you going to continue on the way that you've been, and why you're making those decisions?
Yeah, no, it's definitely been a challenge on a number of levels. I mean, I think that from the beginning, I don't know if it was an obvious choice or something that just happened sort of subconsciously. I've always sort of operated, well, I guess it's interesting. I've been the face of the business because at the beginning it was, Sound Off and Castel were analogous, right? Like I was a person talking to all the customers, meeting all the people, doing all this stuff. But as I remembered, there was at one time, like my cell phone number was on the website, so it was like, you'd be calling and I would be picking up. And so, as things started to get busier and I wanted for Sound Off to feel like a real, in my mind, what was like a real business, I wanted to take myself out. And so it was intentional for me at that point to, we have like an office line that like, I don't pick up, like images on the website that like, it's not me everywhere and doing all the things, right? Because now we have enough content and all that stuff. As we're building the brand, I wanted for the brand to be able to have a life of its own that wasn't, directly connected to me.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of how that part of the business all shaped up. And so it's been interesting because I think that because of the work that we do and the spaces that we're in, I don't think that a lot of people presume that Sound Off is run by a Black person. Mm-hmm. Sometimes my name is a little bit of a giveaway, but it's interesting. Like I remember even when I was in luxury eyewear, I had a customer once that said to me, he called and prospected, and again, it's a luxury brand. And he said, he was in North Carolina and he said, my store's got, a great clientele for your products and, people like you and I shop here. And I remembered like I posted on my Facebook wall, I was like, man, this guy is going to ship bricks when I walk into that store because he thinks that I'm a white dude.
Yeah. Wow.
So, there aren't a lot of, I think in our space, I was the first Black-owned business in this general arena. There's been more that have come along the way, but our brand has never really projected the fact that it's a Black-owned business, because it wasn't really necessary. And also I think for me, not only with Sound Off, but I think in general, I've always wanted to just be on an even playing ground with my peers, right? So it was never leading with the fact that I was a Black person, so I should have like X, Y, and Z opportunity. I just wanted to let the work stand for itself, right? And, it's interesting because sometimes I do get the comment when people find out like it's run by a Black person, they're like, whoa, like it's like they're surprised.
Wow.
And, I mean, it's sort of, it is what it is. I sort of take that with a grain of salt, but I think that, my experience just growing up has just made me want to show that I was always able to compete with my white peers. And it was never a thing about like, hey, I'm a Black kid, so give me this. And I think that's, transferred into my business. With that said, running a business that's Black owned, and kind of being in the times that we're at with all of the systemic injustices in in our country that are coming to light right now, it's an interesting position because we've never been like very civically engaged. Sort of like, what's the right message to send, right? Because we want to make sure that we're being authentic with our messaging, and that it all resonates. But beyond that, I think one of the things that we discussed on our call was like, in the midst of all of this, I'm also processing like what it feels like to be a Black person in America right now, right? So, like, I'm dealing with my own sort of like trauma, and also having to lead this brand that like in many ways is now detached from Castel, the individual, right? So it's, you have to think about, what the brand says, like what the messaging is to our team internally, all those things, while I'm still processing like my own thoughts and like, going through my own grief around this whole situation.
And that was an interesting point that you brought up in our call. And I really thanked you for that perspective, because, it is not something that I think, white America and white business owners would even really have to consider. Am I announcing that I'm a white brand or a white owned business? What obstacles do you think that has caused? And what, I know that you guys had actually posted, a statement online, and there's a lot of organizations that are posting statements. What was the most important part of that statement for you, of speaking as the brand and trying to have a bit of a crowbar separation between Castel and working through what Castel is working through as a Black man in America versus your brand going through it?
Right. So I think, what we posted, I want to make sure that it was authentic to sort of like our brand and our brand voice, during these times. And one of the things that has been at our core, and this is something I didn't really talk to you about earlier when we were talking about just about COVID, when I started reflecting about like our messaging going through COVID, and then also our messaging around, Black Lives Matter and all the other things that are happening right now, is that like our brand has always been about connecting people, right? And that's agnostic of race, creed, color, sexual, gender orientation, all that stuff. Like we, for 10 years, have brought tens of thousands of people together around shared experience.
Yeah.
And so, when you sort of extrapolate from that and you think about like what's happening in the world, it's about like, we need to come together as a community, right? To like solve the systemic issues that are happening with the racial injustice in America. Like, we need to come together as a community to help each other. We need to come together as a community to stand up for one another, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, so that made it a little bit easier to sort of think through. So we connect people through live experience, through events. We connect people through sound. You know, sound, we know has ways to heal. And so we really want to stand on that as we're thinking about like our messaging and making it about, you know, what was happening during the current environment.
I really love that. I love, because that is so true of what Sound Off is. And that's why I love this partnership so much with the possibilities of what we can do with our mindset resets. Is it does bring everybody together, but yet you can have a shared experience, but in your own space, which I think is really important, because everybody has different perspectives of things. But you're still pulling them together, even if they're removed, or in the days of social distancing and all of those things, there's still a joined, connected force. So I love that. And I do feel that your brand has absolutely nailed it, you know, with your messaging, with everything. And I think that you've navigated it very well, you know, as you're dealing with all these things as a leader and being pulled in so many different directions.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It was, you know, like I said, it was very difficult because there's so many different forces, but we just wanted to make sure that we, you know, delivered something that was authentic, and also like respectful, and like something like I could feel proud about standing on.
Yeah. In one of your posts, you've shared a lot of resources that people can go to educate themselves. Is there anything that you'd like to shout out here that, you know, to point people in a direction for education to better understand how to support Black-owned businesses, or just the, you know, Black America as a whole right now?
Yeah, I think that, you know, as all of this was happening, you know, I had to do a lot of my own research, you know, because I, you know, even though I'm a Black person in America and I run a Black-owned business, you know, to be honest, like, I wasn't deeply engaged in the Black Lives Matter movement, not because I didn't want to be. I mean, I had like made donations and that kind of stuff. I understood that was happening. You know, as a Black person, I live through all the systemic issues on a day-to-day basis, right? It's kind of like driving a car at this point, right? But, you know, so, you know, as far as like getting a better understanding for all the, you know, different organizations that are really helping push things from a civic standpoint, it was a little bit of a learning curve for me, because I wasn't deeply rooted in that. But one of the things that I think is important, and has been really important for me, has been mentorship. Not just through the people as, you know, the people that I spoke about as, you know, professional mentors, but I was involved in an organization called Big Brothers Big Sisters as a kid. And that organization works with, you know, it's mostly kids in sort of like low income neighborhoods, and they pair them with mentors, and really that helps, let's say, broaden their horizons, right? You have a lot of kids, you know, growing up, my father wasn't a big part of my life. And so my big brother, Andrew, really stepped in. He, you know, he was there as a male role model for me growing up. And even though he wasn't a Black male, he was a male role model, and he was an ally, you know, and he was there for me. You know, we were matched when I was 8 years old, and we're still in contact today. It's 27 years later.
Wow.
And so, you know, I think that when we talk about systemic issues in this country, there's so many things that, I mean, it's not just like, it's not obvious racism that's happening in the street. You think about like the school systems. I mean, I grew up in Harlem in the 80s, and we had terrible schools. You know, you had 50, 60 kids in a classroom. There's no resources for public education. And, you know, and for a lot of kids in that community, you know, the people that they had to look up to were the drug dealers in their communities, because those were the folks that really had success, right?
Yeah.
I have been really fortunate. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if it was you I was talking to you about this, but I know as I was speaking, I've been having a lot of these kinds of conversations with friends over the last couple of weeks. But
Yeah.
my life has been really interesting because like I've straddled two sides of the fence. Like my mom still lives in the building where I grew up in Harlem. And even though Harlem is gentrified in many ways, there's still a lot of things that haven't changed. Like I went for a walk with my mom this weekend, and as we were on the way back to the apartment, there was like a candlelight vigil to like a drug dealer who'd gotten shot. Like,
wow. Yeah.
and so like I now live downtown. But like, my childhood home is uptown, and it's in an area that like, again, it's still changing and gentrifying. Now there's like patisseries, and we went and got like gelato from this place, like this new restaurant in Harlem, which is like, that wasn't there when I was growing up, but there's still this stuff that's happening, right? There's still, I see people who grew up on my block who are like still on my block, like doing similar things. I'm fortunate that I was like part of the 1% that was able to sort of like get out and do something different. And I think that a lot of that stems from the experiences that I had as a kid. And Andrew was a big part of that for me. Andrew is my big brother. I remember we had, for instance, we had a neighbor growing up who was a reporter for a news station in New York. And that was, he was like really the first person I knew in the community who like, got an education and like made something of himself. He was a TV reporter.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Yeah.
I remember, when he got like a new role or whatever it was, he went and bought a Ford Expedition. And I remember like going for my first ride with him in the car. I was like, oh my God, this is like so cool. And like, what a nice new car. And like, I was like, when I grow up, I want a Ford Expedition. Mm-hmm. And then Andrew became my big brother, and Andrew worked in mall management. He worked for a company called Mace Rich at the time, like handling like leasing. I'd never heard of like someone leasing shopping centers, but evidently there's a lot of money in that.
Yeah.
Andrew drove a Volvo, and he had a cell phone in his Volvo. Like I barely knew anyone that had a cell phone, but he had a cell phone in his car. And so I was like, man, like, I want to drive a Volvo with a cell phone in it.
That's an option? Yeah.
His parents had a house in Long Island. We would go out on the weekends and play tennis. And like, I mean, I played tennis growing up, but I played in this, it was this guy named Mr. Feaster who opened up a tennis clinic in Harlem. It was one court, and I would go for like Tuesdays or Thursday nights, and I would have my lesson there. And but then like I go out to like Long Island, and he's got a tennis court in his house and like a pool and all this stuff. I mean, it just completely broadened my horizons on what was possible.
Yeah.
So I wasn't just shooting to be a not that there's anything wrong with being a news reporter, but I was like, man, there's this whole universe that like now I'm tapped into, and now I could see that possibility. And so, I went from, being, middle school, elementary, middle school in Harlem, and I got a great opportunity through, a headmaster at a school that I was in. He put me in this private school that my mother couldn't afford. I mean, growing up in Manhattan, my mom's salary was $26,000 a year as a
wow. Yeah.
Kids. And so we just didn't have the resources to go to private school, but I had someone that, put some money up so I could go to school and like give me a better opportunity. So I've been really fortunate. And so I, because I've been able to sort of straddle both sides of the fence, from like a socioeconomic standpoint, from an education standpoint, seeing both sides of it, I understand how important it is, to give back to the community. I understand how important it is to give young children of color, hope through experience and opportunity, right? Like being able to get, internships. I mean, because I went to high school in New Canaan, Connecticut, which is a very affluent, area, my first internship out of high school was at a hedge fund. because like
Wow.
the person that I knew, like his dad owned the hedge fund, you know?
Yeah. 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 Like you do. Yeah.
And so like, I mean, the kids that I grew up with on my block, they need no hedge fund managers. Like, how did they get to a hedge fund? And so, that's also, I mean, you have everything that needs to happen on a civic engagement standpoint.
Yeah.
But there's also things that stem back to, like I was saying, like education and creating opportunities, mentorship, internships, all these things to give kids, a brighter future starting, when they're young. Because, if you grow up seeing that there's a glass ceiling ahead of you and like that's as high as you can get, my opportunities as a kid, gave me the vision to see like I could burst through that ceiling, know, and it might be hard to get there, but at least I knew what was possible.
Right. I love that. So I know from seeing your social media, I know that you personally are still very much involved in fundraising for Big Brothers Big Sisters. Is that something that you're still participating in yourself?
Yeah. So when I moved to New York, I got involved with the Young Professionals Committee, and I moved back to New York, maybe 13 years ago now. So when I first moved back, I was really involved with the Young Professionals Committee. But as things picked up with Sound Off, I was doing more travel. I just wasn't able to attend the weekly meetings and all that stuff. So, we find ways to support Big Brothers. I mean, financially, essentially, we participate in their fundraisers. We offer services or raffles and all that stuff. Right now, I know I don't have the bandwidth to be a mentor for someone because I'm just not in like a dedicated place. Like, with Andrew, we met every Sunday. We did something. And so that's really important as far as like having that consistency in another person's life. But there's other ways that I found other ways to contribute. And I love the organization. It's done so much for me. And when I do have the opportunity, I'd love to sign up and be a Big Brother and sort of pay it forward in that way. But in the meantime, we're doing what we can from fundraising and giving them the means to go out and find the people who have the time and are willing to go and participate in these children's lives because they really need it.
Absolutely. Is there anything, as we're closing, is there anything that you would like to shout out that you're doing at Sound Off that, as you're doing the pivot of the century right now?
Yeah, I mean, this whole pivoting period has been very interesting for us. And I think I diverted from your previous comment. Like I said, I get sidetracked quite easily. When COVID hit for us, it was all about sort of going back to our core. Like, what is this business all about? And I think, probably many entrepreneurs that are living through COVID had similar experience where losing your business that you put everything into is like losing a child, and just sort of seeing it all go by the wayside. And I was standing by my child on its deathbed, performing CPR, I'm not going to let you go. And in that, there's a lot of shedding of ego about, this, I didn't do anything wrong for this to happen, right? This was sort of, this is a force majeure. This is outside of my control. But the only thing that I did have control is of how we reacted to it. So the things that we looked at was, there was a couple of things that happened. One is that we're fortunate that we've been around for so long that, even though the whole world was devastated, it was comfortable for us to start having conversations with customers and just leaning on them to hear about kind of what they were thinking about as far as coming out of COVID, what, and what things that they might need. So we could start thinking through that. In one side of the business, that's bounced back has been our retail side, where now a lot of people are looking for solutions so that they can go and do events outside and do things that are socially distanced, especially in the fitness and wellness community, where it's pretty easy. Like, you've got someone on a yoga mat, and our technology allows you to be up to 500 yards away from the source.
It's incredible.
You have like an infinite number of people in a space. And granted, even though there's a lot of limitations on group size, you can have people spaced 10, 20 feet apart, and they're all going to have a similar sonic experience, which is really important.
Yeah.
So our retail stuff has been really picking up. So if anyone out there is looking for solutions on, for wellness events, or for doing, outdoor movies or private parties, you can lean on us. We'll help you keep people nice and distant and have a good time. We've also transitioned some of our services on an event side into virtual experiences. So we've developed some what I'm calling like virtual entertainment offerings and virtual wellness offerings. So we have a dueling piano show, which is amazing.
Yeah.
We have a virtual dance party, which is also incredible. And then things like meditation and yoga. Because we're an audio company first, it was we were hell bent on making sure that we got the sound really right. And so, we're now able to provide live wellness and fitness experiences to clients. We've been talking to a bunch of companies who have, they have all their staff is at home, so they're looking for interesting ways to take advantage of their wellness budgets, because they can't have a yoga instructor come in and do a noon flow. So we're starting to get into that space. So if anyone is looking for those kinds of experiences to plug in, whether it's for, company happy hours or company wellness, or, motivational team building events, like, we can definitely still be a solution for those, even though the physical stuff is probably a little ways off. We're virtually can still connect people.
Perfect. And we'll have a link to Sound Off below this video. And we also have a lot of information about Sound Off on our own efrvsntleadership.com page.
We're excited about working with you all when things open up. And I think, your ideas of where you're looking at taking the technology is amazing. And that's exactly what I was talking about earlier, is like, we are now the tool, and we get to work with creatives like you to sort of take the technology to new levels. So
well, thanks for saying yes. Thanks for saying yes to everything, so that way we have the opportunity. Castel, thank you so much for your time today, and just being able to pick your brain and learn more about your intuitive leadership skills, because much of that I know was not necessarily taught from a book. I know from our previous conversations as well, we didn't really talk about that very much, but it's not necessarily that you did any type of research into it. It was just intuitive for you. So, it's
hard knocks.
Yeah. So I really appreciate your time talking to our viewership about all that. So thank you.
And I hope that for your listeners and any entrepreneurs out there, it's definitely, being an entrepreneur is hard. But I love, for me, that's what's exciting, is being able to sort of live through these lessons, day in, day out. It keeps things interesting at all times. There's never a dull moment at Sound Off. That is for sure. And, but you really have to want that, like, that sort of chaos is not for everyone. And either you have to be about it, or you need someone on your team who's about it. Right. Because, when you're in a startup, when you're starting your own business, there's constant shifts, and you need to be able to adapt to those changes to maximize your opportunity. And so, it's oftentimes, like, even for me, it can be daunting and overwhelming, but like, it's one of those things where, it's part of my ethos, is just to, like, it's that hunger to, like, succeed. Yes.
That keep going. You want that Volvo with the cell phone.
Exactly. You got to Volvo.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you again. I really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right.